fraud's becoming so sophisticated. Fraudsters are becoming so sophisticated. So I think it's like it's an ongoing problem to solve, right? So it's not, when you look at fraud, right, it's not just one type of fraud. It's not just identity fraud, it's income fraud, right? There are various types of fraud to solve for, and these fraudsters are becoming more tech savvy, more prevalent, more sophisticated. So it's sort of this ongoing quest, and you really do need a partner that's thinking about fraud collectively as a full solution and not just, hey, we're just going to do this part.
Okay, welcome to the Digital Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reed.
Reed, we had Caren on from get100.com, or we asked her this, 100. Hundy? Yeah. You asked her a little bit about the URL story. I don't think we got a lot out of that, besides she said she bought like 20 URLs and decided that the company is called 100, but she's running with get100.com.
Yeah, but it wasn't a spelling. It wasn't because of spelling or necessarily the URL itself. It was the 100% confidence, which made more sense, versus many of the entrepreneurs and startups we've had. It's just been a spelling related to get creative with a name.
Yeah.
Which on some level we can empathize, but I feel like, that wasn't entirely our inspiration.
Yeah.
Our motivation.
Totally.
Yeah.
And when she said 100% confidence, if you're not familiar with 100, what that company does is it detects fraud, basically. So it's replacing like identity verification, financial verification, all these types of verification that you do before you grant a renter or a prospect approved for an apartment. And she's trying to bring it all together, so you don't have to have multiple systems.
Yeah. And I love the fact, like many of our guests, but she was super open. And one of the things she wanted to make sure she was able to share is just the experience of founding, I think it was Nestio, right? Then turned to Funnel. But what she's learned, what's changed, what's different for her in this second venture, which is super fascinating for us. And I hope most of our listeners, but certainly has learned a lot and seems well on her way to a second successful venture, although it caught me off guard. I didn't realize it's only been a month or two. And so, yeah, they're in the very early stages, but it seems like, again, one of those no-brainers that is always a question that I get to when you hear, especially from the founders or as folks that are leading the company, why wouldn't somebody buy this? It just seems like, so what are the objections? And that's when I realized, oh, you're only a month or two in, because she's just getting, she's just starting to hear some of those.
Yeah, well, that's what I think is a compliment to how they've gone about with the branding and launch, where you first visit the website, get100.com, and you feel like it's a more established thing. And you complimented her. I don't know if that was still recording or if that was off air, but just her presence, basically, and how good and elegant she is with answering questions, and also is willing to talk about anything. Because a lot of folks that are more seasoned may just dodge questions and not give you immediate answers. She still answers the question, and just in a very elegant way.
Yeah. Diplomatic, but not political, in the way that he answered some of those questions, and still, managed to offer quite a bit of transparency. So love the balance that she was able to tell.
To your point,
trying to learn from that.
The first half of the episode, we basically were just covering like learnings, like what were your past learnings and what would you do differently. And that was fun for me because you and I haven't talked a ton about that. We've talked a little bit about that together. But yeah, we haven't spent as much time there, and it's fun to hear someone that has a different experience than two of us, but how they go about it.
Yeah.
Anything else we should cover here before we?
I don't think so. You should just listen.
Yeah. Listen, we really enjoyed Caren. Can't
listen, damn it.
On.
Yeah.
Okay, we're here with Caren of 100. Caren, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us the elevator pitch of 100?
You got it. Thrilled to be here. My name's Caren Maio. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 100. 100 eliminates the bias, fraud, and friction from the multifamily screening process.
Awesome. I also love the take you have on branding. By the way, like I wasn't familiar with you guys until you got scheduled for this interview. I know you just did a nice pitch at Optech, but I missed that session. But could you just maybe speak a little bit to the branding, like with the loud? I mean, I know you have some experience with funnels, so they're loud with the pink. Is there something in your veins here about neon colors?
I'm just loud, I guess. just loud New Jersey Italian. No, I think so. Starting off in college, my major was brand building, so I've always been fascinated around how a brand gets built and the feelings that it can sort of evoke in a person. I think it's somewhat coincidental that both companies are sort of this neon bright color, but I do feel like boldness in this industry kind of pays off, right? And then specifically around 100, it's really leaning into this idea of 100% confidence, right? We're trying to deliver confidence in real estate renting on both sides of the equation for the renter and for the operator. So for the renter, right, it's 100% security, 100% good to, kind of good to go. On the operator side, it's that confidence, it's that, surety and sort of who you're renting to. So we felt like it harkened to those two things.
Yeah, loudness does pay off. I mean, that's why my first question was about brand, just because I think it was fun. And I also love some of the, um, I don't know if I'd call it quirkiness, but things like where you say, obviously, like you're talking about fraud and making sure that they're valid tenants, but then saying the F word multifamily. So I just think that's
Mhm.
super fun. And a lot of multifamily companies have taken themselves what feels like too seriously. And so I think it's cool that you're taking that angle. But let's back up to why fraud? Why now? This is your second stint starting a company in multifamily. So let's just back up and do a little bit of your career journey and get to the why now.
Yeah, sure. So I joke around that I'm the old lady of prop tech, but that's a self-imposed title. And I always, I started my career in the space back in 2011 and, felt like, technology is really not playing as significant of a role in real estate as it is in other industries. And it felt like just a matter of when, not if. So started my career by co-founding Funnel out of my apartment with my co-founder. Couple pivots later and kind of evolutions later, we landed on what would ultimately become Funnel, but I'd say the North Star was always there. After I left Funnel, I joined a fund called Camber Creek as an EIR for them, and that was a ton of fun and a great experience. Joined a company called Moved as their president, which was an awesome ride as they were making their move into multifamily. And you'll see a theme here. Multifamily prop tech is my lot in life, happily. And then finally landed on 100 and had that itch to start something. But um, it's kind of interesting, I think, when you've started something before, because you can't play the first time naive founder card anymore. I'm sure you guys feel this too, where it's like you know too much, you know? Um, so I guess like really how we landed on 100 and the idea of fraud and debt, um, started having conversations with customers and prospects, or just people in multifamily. And I started asking them, hey, what are some of the things you're trying to solve for? And I had quite a few come to me actually proactively and ask me if I knew of any good collection agencies and solutions for their bad debt problems. And that begged the question, well, why? And tell me more and talk to me more about how you're doing that. Why are you doing it that way? And ultimately, sort of landed on this idea that fraud is yet to be solved. It's probably the number one pain point and sort of affliction affecting multifamily right now. And I felt like, man, big market, big, hairy problem. There's something there.
Well, I do want to get to that and understand why it's not solved yet, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask you about the naive founder card. Reed and I have been super transparent on different episodes of this podcast, so we'll happily share as well. But this is only our first startup in multifamily. It is my third startup, though,
Yeah.
overall. But my other companies were not nearly taking as big of a swing or gained as much traction, and I definitely didn't go to raise any money. So I'm curious though, where would being the naive founder benefit you, and where now in the second time is it almost like an impediment that you have to work against, and then also then the final thing is where does it help you having that experience?
Yeah. Great questions. I'd say sort of the first bit, the um, just like the blind optimism of like, oh, of course we can do this. Of course this thing should exist and we should bring it to market because if not us, then who? I think that really drove a lot of the early days of Funnel. And I had, quite a few people ask me, oh, well, you came from real estate, right? No. Oh, well, you must have come from technology then. Nope. Didn't do that either. So I think it was just this kind of will and this passion around I was kind of the weirdo who, whenever someone was like, "Oh, I'm apartment hunting," I was like, "Oh, I'll help." I just loved real estate, and I had this belief that technology would play a more important role, and I followed that. So I think the naivete of, oh yeah, of course, we'll be the ones to bring this to market. Um, I don't know, we were very early in the space. I don't know if we would have been successful had we brought a solution to market like that today. I think we were sort of early movers. We were able to take advantage of a bit of that. But it was like school of hard knocks, being a first time founder, new to real estate, new to technology. So I think from a sort of first experience, everything was fresh, versus now. Um, I still have that passion. I still have that drive. I still have that excitement about what we're doing. And I'm able to look at things that pop up and say, oh, okay, I've been here before. And the lows aren't as low. And you can kind of see things as they are and have a bit of a steadier hand while you do it.
So that's the benefit of it now, is like maybe you're more measured, like, emotionally through
Yeah.
the process.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people, embrace the roller coaster. That's a really difficult, it's kind of easier said than done though, right? It's a hard thing to do when you're experiencing everything for the first time and you have these like, oh shit moments again and again. And that's not to say you don't have them as a second time founder, but I think the benefit is you sort of really can adopt that, and you can see things just a bit more clearly, right? It's like, you do experience first times, but you also experience things that you've experienced before, and maybe you have the chance to do it better or do it differently next go around.
What about you, Reed? If you started another one, what do you think the experience would help versus maybe hinder?
I don't know where it would hinder, other than we've been super fortunate. We know that like Digital's kind of surpassed, I think, any expectations that we had, and both of us had pretty big expectations. So, and I say that with full humility. I'm just acknowledging that we've been very lucky, and we've worked hard, but it's been a great outcome. So I think that would be, if there's any possibility of hindering, is that I think this is normal. But I feel like I've heard enough and built up enough of a network with other entrepreneurs to know that it's not. So I think it would mostly just be positives that I would pick up from it. Certainly, just those early stages, I'm not sure I would do a ton differently, but there are definitely some things I would shortcut. I'm not going to get into that list though, because that's pretty long as far as what I've learned and what I would use if I were ever to start another company.
I
Totally.
think I'm kind of with both of you. I think I would be more even emotionally, because I'd be like, there's gonna be 100 of these things, and do you need to get so down in the dumps every time, whatever like thing goes sideways? Um, and also I could see, because of that, maybe me being like, this one, meaning with Digital, I was like, this has to work, versus like with the next one, I might be like, well,
Yeah.
it's not as important. It's not like a life or death situation. You've got more years. You can start a third one. Like, what's it matter? And that also then means, depending on how I set my goal, if the goal was like, for sure, you want like a cash flowing company, I'd probably maybe shoot like lower on the ambition scale, versus if I was like, well, I don't really care if this is more about like impact or change or something, then maybe I'd shoot way higher, but then not be as emotionally tied to like its outcome, because it's like, oh, I'm going to take a swing and it's okay if it misses.
Yeah. So, couple interesting things there. I think one, definitely making sure that like capital ties up with like sort of the big hairy vision and where you want to be, and like making sure you have the right capital for the right business. That was a big lesson learned. And I always advise entrepreneurs around like, hey, just because you can raise that big round doesn't mean you should. Like, think about where you want your business to be and sort of what success looks like, because you want a partner on the other end who's cheering for the same thing, right? And I think that, I mean, for me, that was like a big lesson learned of like being a bit, to your point, a bit more measured, David, around like, hey, yeah, this is what I want to build, and this is the right way to get there, for sure.
Yeah.
I just add on real quickly because that hit me. As far as defining what success looks like,
Yeah.
that's not something that we did because survival was success, and I think too many entrepreneurs accept that or just think that way, or they're beholden to some pitch deck that they put in front of VC, and that's not really success either. I mean, that's what you might get held accountable to. But usually that evolves quite a bit, or devolves,
Well,
depending on who you are over the next few years. And I actually gave that advice that Caren just said, to a emerging entrepreneur, that one of the smarter things you can do is, and not that it had to be EOS, but it's just be clear within 1 to 3 years. I don't think there's tons of value in going 5 to 10 when you're just starting a business, but yeah, know what will make you happy. And that's a different way of thinking about success. A lot of people just think in terms of financial, but I think especially if you've had a chance to do a second company or a third company, you should be thinking success should equate more to happiness than it should just some monetary number.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
Caren, we got that advice. I think it was at the first, was it the Optech when we met Todd Kettler at like a
Yeah.
dive
Oh
bar?
my God. Yeah.
And he was like, he sat down with us. He's like, "So you guys raising money?" And we're like, "Nah, I don't think so, but there's a few options." And he's like, "You need to be laser specific about why." And he was, I just,
Well, right behind that, he said, "Are you going to raise money?" Then he's like, "So are you going to sell or not sell?"
yeah. So I
It's
thought that
like,
was good, and then I took that to mean almost kind of what you're saying, Reed, about like, what personally do you want from this endeavor?
Mhm.
And we just never had done the work on that to say like, okay, great, what personally would we want out of this? Is it more like time freedom, flexibility, or major financial outcome? But we never even put like pencil to that as far as like what is that North Star, kind of as Caren was
I
referencing
thought
earlier.
the other great, I don't know if I call it advice, but just awareness that this was years later with Nick Bradley. We had him come in and do this workshop. He has a great podcast himself. I always ask you, what's the name of it?
High value
This is
exit,
our plug, high value exit.
or no, scaling up. Sorry.
Scaling up.
Yeah.
But anyways, we had him come in just to talk to us, do a workshop, and kind of evaluate Digital on multiple levels. It was a pretty wide open thing, but he just said the second that you raise capital, you're a performance business. So just understand that there's no two ways about it.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you're privately held and bootstrapped, then you can still dream or think about it in more of a terms of lifestyle business. But the minute that you raise money, you have become a performance business. And he wasn't saying that to scare us or say that there's anything wrong with that, but that maybe there's too many entrepreneurs out there that think they can have it both ways. And I'm not saying there isn't a small percentile that it works out that way, but typically, yeah, when you bring on investors, you just need to be prepared that, it is all about the performance, the financial,
It's just a
outcome.
different, yeah, to your point, it's just a different track, and there
Yeah.
isn't a right or a wrong. Like, I mean, I
Right.
remember early days, and this is dating back to Funnel, back when it was Nestio. I feel like, a lot of, whether it was the press or just other founders, it was like this mile marker of success of, oh, how much money did you raise and from whom? And there's a whole lot of ways to capitalize a business. Its own revenue is one, right? And valuing VC dollars. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with VC dollars. It's just making sure that the type of business you want is aligned with that and is aligned with those partners' expectations. Because Reed, to your point, it's a very different path. And if you think you're going to bootstrap this business or you have a certain mindset around how you want to grow it, and your partner doesn't share that definition, you could be in for some really hard and kind of unnecessary conversations.
For sure. Speaking of early lessons, but also to ask you, coming back to what's, from your first company to this one, um, I think knowing up front whether you're going to be, we'll call it a 0 to 1, product or service or solution versus somebody that's coming in behind somebody else. Because I think there's trade-offs there too. I'd love to hear your take on that, Caren, but we certainly experienced that. We were feeling super excited about what we were bringing to market. It hadn't, really hit real estate, the platform that, but there was all sorts of frustrations and aggravation in trying to bring something new because we were having to do so much education, and
Yeah.
we weren't sure whether we were too far out in front, or if there was other things that we had just missed along the way. And we figured a lot of it out, but
Yeah.
we'd be totally full of BS if we said we figured it all out. So I'm just curious. You mentioned that you got in early. If you were to start a third company, I don't know if this is the right way of putting it,
Give
but
me a minute,
you know,
Reed.
would you want to be first to market, or would you rather come behind somebody that's gotten things started and then you just improve on it?
Oh God, that's such a good question. And they're so different to your point. So like I've been part of a company and started a business, right, that was a rip and replace, right? Like when you think of when we were initially bringing Funnel to market, core of it was lead management CRM, right? There were other CRMs that existed that were in market, and there were pros and cons to it, right? One was that there was already the line item on the budget versus something like Moved, which was really bringing a whole new category to the industry. This idea of onboarding, offboarding really didn't exist. Moved has been a pioneer in bringing that to market, and that came with its own pros and cons, right? When you're bringing a new category, I don't need to tell you guys this, right? And whether you already have entrenched players or you don't, I'd say for me, what all of those experiences and everything in between, even some of the advisory and consulting, what they all kind of taught me was I wanted to be a part of something that was a must have for the industry. So I'd say more than anything else, what was driving me was I want something that's a huge, scary, kind of audacious problem to solve because I really wanted, and again, it didn't really matter so much to me of was I first to market, was I fifth to market? It really didn't matter. It was it a problem to be solved, and was it something top of mind for our customers and future customers? Because I'll say I've sold a bunch of different kinds of products, and the reception to something like 100 has been unmatched because it's a hair on fire problem that the industry is collectively saying we need a solution.
Well, let's talk about that. Why is fraud not solved today? I mean, I even remember read the first MTech we presented at one of those other.
Yeah.
There was a fraud company in that
God,
like
what was the
batch.
name of that?
It was like ID Verify or something. I mean, it had ID in the name.
Check ID?
Maybe that Checkpoint ID.
Checkpoint ID. I think
Yeah.
that's it.
Anyways, Karen, what's why is it not solved?
Well, I think, fraud's becoming so sophisticated. Fraudsters are becoming so sophisticated. So I think it's like it's an ongoing problem to solve, right? So it's not when you look at fraud, right? It's not just one type of fraud. It's not just identity fraud. It's income fraud, right? It's very there are various types of fraud to solve for, and these fraudsters are becoming more tech savvy, more prevalent, more sophisticated. So it's sort of this ongoing quest, and you really do need a partner that's thinking about fraud collectively as a full solution and not just, hey, we're going to do, and this is a lot of what we heard in sort of our roadshow leading up to 100, but we're just going to do this part, or we're just going to do that part. We're just going to do identity. We really view this is a full solution. It requires, or there's a full problem and it's wide ranging and it requires a full solution. And it requires a company, I think, or comprised of players who are seasoned enough where they've seen the movie a time or two. And I think that's what's so unique about our team, right? Like we've brought solutions to market that have been game changing for the industry. We sort of know the rakes that have been stepped on. We know how to avoid them. And I think the product is wide enough where it's solving for a full solution, but it's narrow enough in scope where like we're just thinking about fraud all day, every day. We're not trying to be a bunch of different things. We're maniacally focused on solving this problem.
So we educate Reed and I here a little bit. This is kind of
Yeah.
outside. We hear from our clients, like in certain markets, like how bad fraud is for them. But
Yeah.
it's more of just them bubbling up and saying, "Hey, can you make sure you get us like quality leads?" Is what they're really telling us to do. So,
Sure.
what are people using like 3 or 4 solutions per property at the moment? And then how much fraud, I guess, happens if that's the case? Versus maybe you guys being one stack, and are you just combining 3 or 4 solutions together to make it simple, which I would appreciate, and how does that impact the fraud picture?
Yeah. So I'd say in general, like if you look, there's some crazy stats. Like NMHC published a study earlier this year just talking about how prevalent fraud and bad debt has become. In the past 12 months, 93%, over 93% of all multifamily operators surveyed experienced fraud past year, which is insane when you think about it. Think of any other problem or category in our space. And when you look at, oh my God, virtually every single customer has experienced this problem, it's insane. Right. So when you look at something like that, it's like, okay, wow, that's a big, hairy problem.
Can
So
I
then,
challenge you
yeah,
just a little bit
please,
on
right.
that,
Go ahead.
Karen? So if the average owner has, let's say, I'll just use five assets, and there's 250 units. I'm trying to use pretty convenient math. This isn't super
You
totally
chose
convenient.
4.
Okay, thank you. I was
Yeah.
just about to say, let me walk that back and turn this into
Yeah, I
4
was about to say
properties
this
with
later. I
250.
mean, I might need
It's
another.
no longer convenient, yeah.
Yeah.
But everybody stay with me. So, 1,000 units. To me, it's almost like a business, and we experience it. How many write-offs do we have? You build enough scale, you're going to get somebody, you're going to have a write-off. So I don't know that I'm actually challenging or pushing back, but just looking for a little bit more perspective or context here. Because with a lot of multifamily owners, given the number of units and assets they have under management,
Yeah.
chance that they're going to deal with fraud. So I'm not stunned to hear everybody's dealing with this.
Yeah.
I'm wanting a little bit more color there, like, as it relates to that use case, can you put a little more around it?
Yeah. I mean, there's about several million. It's around 4.2 million of bad debt that's being written off across the average operator. Obviously, you scale that up, you scale that down, depending on the operator you're talking to. But when you look at all the operators across the country, it's billions of dollars of bad debt that's being written off each year. And a vast majority of that is due to some level of fraud, right? It's a poor screening decision or it's some level of fraud. And then when you dig deeper inside of that, it's okay, is it identity? Is it financial? So that led us to, okay, well, what solutions are in market right now, right? How are they working? That also led us to look a bit outside of multifamily and say, okay, well, what are other industries doing? Which sounds so simple, but again, I think it's important, right? So that led us to, okay, well, let's look at aviation, let's look at hospitality, let's look at fintech, and let's see what solutions are being brought to market. And can we maybe learn and take a page out of those playbooks to bring something to market that would make sense for multifamily?
Well, that helps. So billions of dollars in bad debt each year. Um,
Yeah, it's a
but
little
can
over
you
6
translate?
billion. If you take a look at all the mid-market and kind of enterprise folks, it's a little over 6 billion if you were to assume about, 4 and change across each operator.
And that's with the current solutions in place, is what you're saying,
Right.
because they're already preventing more than 6 billion, you would think.
Yeah.
But the 6 billion is getting through.
I was just trying to translate that to a single property.
Sure.
What might that look like if you're an owner that's coming into multifamily for the first time, and then you meet Karen? It's like, just an FYI, you're
Yeah.
probably going to have X amount of leases over the next 12 to 24 months that are gonna
If
default.
I use
Okay.
200,000 buildings, that's 30,000 per property.
Yeah, which is about what you see around, when you look
Which
at,
is
okay,
typical
total
leases.
cost of like getting one wrong. What does that look like? It's anywhere between 25 and 30,000
Got it. Nice
Okay.
job.
unit,
Thank
which
you.
is
Help with math.
good math
Well,
there, man.
thank you. I my napkin math read. There's a point to it.
Sometimes it's off, sometimes it's on.
I mean, you just
Uh,
teed 'em up. You just teed 'em up perfectly for me. I love it. But no,
so
but it's a very expensive problem. So when you talk about like a must-have and sort of why it's so important is if you get it wrong, you just look at how difficult it is and there's legislation that's coming out that makes it really expensive to right a wrong decision that, ideally you want someone in the unit who can afford it, and someone who is who they claim to be, right? And if they're not, you're in for a world of hurt and it's a really costly mistake.
So it sounds like people are using, many of the folks are using, whether it's identity verification, financial verification, across the industry. But what did you learn from these other industries, like you said, aviation or hospitality, fintech, that you would plan to do with 100 that is different than what we do today?
Yeah. So I'd say the biggest thing, like takeaway was, man, like we're an industry that does all this upfront work around, hey, renter, go out and gather all your information, with be it documents, digital syncing, et cetera. Do all this work and then give it to us. And then we're going to do all this work. And then at the very end, touring, figuring out which property you like, which unit you like, we're going to tell you if you qualify. We've wasted hours, in many cases days, in vetting, when in reality, like, what if we introduced some of that work up front and almost created like a pre-qual type process, right? And this was, looking at mortgage, fintech. We looked at other industries and said, man, like, what if we could introduce a process that could create kind of a win-win, where if we could guide the renter and give the renter some of that agency, they could kind of sharpen their pencil and maybe be a bit more educated around what made sense for them. And then they're actually being dropped off at a property or at a unit with that education, wouldn't it save both sides a lot of time and ultimately a lot of money and a lot of headache? So I'd say that was probably like headline biggest thing of, man, if we could really flip the script here and turn this thing on its head and mimic almost like a mortgage style process, it could probably introduce a lot of benefits to both sides of the equation.
So should I think of this more than like you're saying pre-qualified mortgage, almost like you're going to market like Carfax or something?
It's a
Like
good way to think of it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
what's the go-to-market then for you guys? Are you selling to the management companies at all, or are you really going after the consumer?
Yeah, so we're very much selling to the management companies because a lot of what we've heard, a lot of the pain that these folks are experiencing, it's, time, and it's not only the software they're using, but the time for the team they're deploying to actually vet this information, vet these applicants. And it creates friction on both sides. So our distribution is, let's go to the PMCs, let's go to the operators and say, listen, we've built a solution that covers various types of fraud. We are kind of you can view us as your first, second, and third line of defense. Outsource that work to us, delegate it to us. We're going to make sure that the folks coming through your door are who they say they are, make what they say they make, and they're willing and ready to honor their commitments. So that's really, when we think about go to market, we really view the PMCs as the linchpin behind this because they're the major point of distribution.
So you'll get the PMCs on board to start using you guys instead of the other solutions. And then when does the consumer ever take this pre-qualified, mortgage to their next asset?
Yeah, yeah. So I'd say a lot of what we're thinking about right now is like that first kind of, call it like the cold start, right? Which is like, hey, that first sort of touch. How do we introduce 100 to the consumer? And we feel like from a trust perspective, it's much better to kind of take advantage off of the partnership we have with the PMC, right? So imagine, David, you've toured a property and you like the property, maybe you looked at a couple units, enter 100. The PMC says, great, we leverage 100, and you're going through this experience and you're getting introduced to, great, I now have interest. I know that I might want this property, or I might want, one or two properties in the vicinity. I'm now going in and getting introduced to what I can afford so I can be a little bit sharper and a little bit more surgical with my decision.
Got it. So it would be more of they still want to apply for a unit at the beginning, then they're doing the 100 check, and if that check is like, hey, you applied for a $2,800 apartment, but you just don't qualify, you could go get something for 2,400. Then they may take that to a different asset if the current one they're looking at doesn't have a solution for them.
Or like imagine, hey, we've got a sister property around the corner and there actually is something for 2,400, or there is something inside of the property. It just might not have been the initial unit
Mm.
or layout that you were interested in. It's a great way to sort of keep that person in the experience inside of the community. So I think, that's another way to look at it.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what your theory is on what's driving the fraud, the increase in fraud. And that may seem obvious or maybe not, at least to our listeners, but
Yeah.
why is it that, this seems to be exponentially like this problem growing? Is it because of the housing crisis? Is it because of these bad actors are talking to other bad actors or whatever and saying,
Yeah.
hey, this is an easy thing? Um, because I mean, well, I don't want to lead too much. Yeah, what's the theory?
I think it's a yes and like I can't say to you, Reed, oh, it's this thing. This is the thing that's causing all of the fraud. I think it's an amalgamation of several things. So one is generally, if you look at income growth and charted against rent growth over the past 2 decades, rent growth grew 4 times faster than income. Right. So that's one. So that's like a true like housing affordability, like that delta is real. That exists. Second is, I think if you look at, legislation at local levels, it's now become harder in various cities across the country to figure out a way to part ways with someone who maybe can no longer afford a unit, or maybe someone who was fraudulent to begin with. It's very difficult, right, to sort of break up with a tenant. And then the third is the prevalence of that, and the prevalence of a lot of these operators going online, which I'll talk about in a second, because I saw that at sort of my first company, around this push to make processes that weren't digital, and sort of the ramifications of that. And then this social distrust layer that's occurred where now like folks are talking about, hey, this is how you can scam or get around so and so. this is the way to do it. The prevalence of social networks and folks now having this conversation online has made some of these things spread like wildfire. Some of these sort of, whether it's bad actors or bad practices, it's now, a search away.
And this is mostly out of just curiosity, but when is this fraud identified? Is it typically early stage of a lease? Is it in the offboarding? Like obviously, I get it. Like when somebody can't pay their bill anymore, but I didn't know if you could put any more, I guess, context around
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So surprisingly, again, this is more qualitative right now, but a lot of the folks we spoke to, they can pinpoint it within the first quarter or two, right? Like
Yeah.
within the first, call it 90 or so days, give or take. There's a pretty straight correlation between fraud and almost immediate delinquency.
The somewhat background behind that question was I wonder how many folks with fraudulent identities are never discovered because they're actually paying their bill. So, but they couldn't get into the apartment, because of their credit or, because of their background, ex-con, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I'm going to pay my bill, but I know I need a different identity in order to get into this home.
Yeah, it's an interesting hypothesis. I would say identity fraud is the most insidious in our experience because it's never just identity fraud. It's identity and financial. It's identity and financial and background. So I do think, it was so important for us to get identity right, because it's never just that.
Yeah. And another question, this is more just company building, I guess. But cost model, did you start with the same cost model that you have now? And how did you go about determining that? That was something, just speaking, again, founder to founder, but
Yeah.
it is, I think, one of the harder things to figure out usually when you're building a company is how to approach that
I'm glad you
pricing.
brought that up. I'm glad you brought this up because they're like dedicated companies to figuring out how you, and I'm curious to hear from you guys around how you, I mean, I'm happy to share kind of my thoughts on it. Um, because now this will be the third like early stage company I've been involved with, like when you count funnel moved, in 100. And pricing a product is so challenging, and they're all so different. So I mean, I'll share with you my best thinking, and maybe we can do a retro on this a year later, and you'd be like, Caren, you still price it, I mean, like, what have you learned? Um, I'd say generally, this is an area where I'm having a lot of conversations with early adopters, with the market, with supporters to say, hey, listen, what's working about the current structure, what's not. And this is the one area where I'd say, like, we're really trying to figure out how do we align incentives, because I think this idea of paying for units or paying for portions of your portfolio that aren't necessarily in service, I think that's an outdated model. Um, so we're trying to do better, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we align incentives? So I think part of that is like also like we've been in this like price per unit mode as an industry for so long. So how do we break away from that? And then the other is what's right for this business in particular, because what was right for the first business, totally different product, totally different. Also, it was a very different time. So it's trying to figure out how do you pair the right model with the right business at the right time, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
I mean, I'm curious as to how you guys think about it.
Still asking the question though.
I'm sorry?
So, well, I'm still asking the question is how, have you changed,
It's well, so the company only launched last month. So
oh, okay, well
so
then
there
good.
hasn't really been a lot of change yet, but if you ask me again in a year,
Alright,
probably.
my bad, I didn't realize it was
It's okay.
that early.
No, no, no,
Yeah,
it's okay, it's okay.
I think also knowing your industry, right? Like when we first got into this space, we would have thought with our solution, we're like, oh, let's do a consumption based or something like that.
Totally.
And the way that they buy marketing, we learned isn't that way. Like they're like, I want to know exactly what it is for this tooling. I don't want to pay based on consumption or number of units. It's kind of like a diamond package is a diamond package on apartments.com. It's not really based on your open unit count or anything like that. So I thought that was interesting to learn. And so then we've learned more about how hard it is to get a new line on a GL in this industry. And so then the easiest way is to be like, well, if I can replace these 3 other items combined and save you 20%, or these 3 other items and our fraud detection or whatever is 20% better, that makes it easy. And then we've also been putting it through different lenses, like Alex Hormozy wrote a book called $100 million Offers. So then the question is, or there's another book, Lazy CEO, that talks about the mafia offer. So is there a way that you can take those constraints of this industry and then develop something that is an offer you can't refuse? Meaning it's a mafia offer, it's $100 million offer. So that, like for you, I don't know enough yet, but it'd be interesting to be like, well, you can replace these 2 other products or 3 other products. We're 20% better. And I've got the guarantors on my mind. Do you know the guarantors?
Yeah, of course.
It'd be like anybody that passes our verification, we're tying with like a guarantor, insurance model or whatever, right? Where it's like a warranty model where it's like they're guaranteed. Well, we're buying insurance on it, so you are guaranteed that rent moving forward. That to me would be a no-brainer, because then it's like it's past our verification, and then like if for whatever reason we were wrong, we'll make good on it, right?
Totally. Yeah, no, and I think you nailed it too, David, with like you want to create like a no-brainer situation. And I'm sure you guys even thinking through your model, right? It's like, okay, like we obviously we want shots at goal, we want scale. So how do we make it a win-win? So that's very much what we're thinking about. And we're trying to find that right balance, right? Obviously you want it to be a sustainable model because you want the business to be successful, right? It's not helping anyone if you're bleeding through money to provide the service. And you want to make sure that it's a win-win. And I think in this market, you also, you need to demonstrate that, hey, there's a path to either making you more money or saving you money with your existing solutions. And to your point, I think we have a path to show, hey, you're currently using multiple solutions to solve this problem. We're going to come in and replace these 3 with 1.
I was just going to add, he mentioned a couple books. I'll add a third, is the Chris Voss book, Never Split the Difference, and it's focused on negotiation. But the thing he says, one of the more important things, it may seem like obvious, but is to know, have an anchor, know what your anchor is going to be. And for pricing, I think back to where we were earlier, defining success up front. But if you're trying to build a cash flowing business, a business that can scale, then you are going to need to price a product a certain way, right? If you don't do the math, it could sneak up on you where it's like, holy shit, I'm going to have to sell 100,000 properties,
Right.
given the amount of resources, engineering or whatever else that you have planned. And it's just one of those things that's missed. I think that's a good starting point back to the anchor, but then the profit approach is you just keep stress testing, and the best thing you can do is do it early, right?
Totally.
Versus 2-3 years in as people start to get comfortable with those rates. So to me, you don't assume that you're going to get it right out front. You're probably going to get it wrong, but you have to have the anchor that economically makes sense, and then you just keep stress testing for the next few years, and that's going to be your rate.
I could not agree more. That's what we did past life. I remember when I was at Moved, we were, and this was just like, these were early days, like friendly conversations. And we were trying to stress test it. To your point, Reed, like we had kind of our floor. I apologize. I've got a chihuahua in the background.
No.
We had our floor. And then we started kind of stress testing a little bit and saying, okay, great. Now, if she really wants to be in the shot, I'm really
We
sorry.
want her in the shot. This
That'll
is
be
our
fun.
first
Stella.
chihuahua.
This
Yeah.
is Stella.
She
Stella the chihuahua.
do any dog tricks? You got any treats in your back pocket?
She's really not treat motivated, and she's the only one who really doesn't do. If I had like one of the other 2, they'd high five you, they'd give paw. She's kind of the lazier chihuahua that we have here. But she but we would stress test it. We did exactly what you said, where we had a group of friendlies and it was like, cool, run through the demo, run through the value, like really talking about the value and the before and the after, and it was like, cool, it's X. Okay, now it's X plus Y. Now it's X plus Y plus Z. And you try to find that like upper bounds of what makes sense. But I think being really agile early on, that's so important, and being okay with being wrong, because it's like you're trying to find that happy medium. And you don't know unless you talk to customers and you have some of those conversations. So
Well, I always ask this question. So and I put it different ways, but this time I'm going to say, what's been the biggest obstacle for you, like biggest objection? Because I think that's another thing, a learning from me is most entrepreneurs, when they come up with an idea, and they go through some process of vetting it, you know, they can't imagine somebody not buying their product. And
Yeah,
I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but it's like you get really passionate. And you're like,
totally.
got this great option. We're solving this really difficult problem. Why wouldn't you buy it? But then you go to market and 9 out of 10 people don't buy it. I mean, again, exaggerating a couple points here, but I'm sure you're getting objections, and I'm just curious what those. And you're only a month in, so maybe this isn't fair to ask about this, but maybe it'd be better to say what kind of objections would you anticipate hearing? Because this seems like such a no-brainer.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, and obviously to your point, right? You fall in love, and like part of it is like you don't want to fall in love with the solution, right? Because then you start taking things personally, and it's not personal, right? But I will say, one thing that I've learned and this is even previous life, not just 100, but when we were so early at funnel, and I think there were pros and cons to that, right? And this was Nestio funnel days. It was really sort of early innings of real estate tech. It was still called real estate tech. There were pros of being early. There wasn't as much action in the industry. And it wasn't even just other CRMs. It was anything else that an operator could adopt, right? Like there weren't as many tech providers coming to operators, pitching them for meetings, for time. You now have many more companies, whether they're in your category or not, and you're just competing for mind share, right? So I'd say just generally, um, the biggest question that I think a lot of prop tech companies need to answer, it's not so much like why you, it's almost like why now in a category. Like, why should I be thinking about this now? I've got my full-time job. I have to maybe even run a team on top of that. Like, I have all these things I have to be doing to keep my business going. Taking time, taking a meeting with you is like extra. It's on top of that. And I have other tech companies, not just in your category, but in others that I need to contend with. Why should I put your company or really your category at the top of that list? So
I
I would
love
say just, right?
I love this thread. So now I have to ask you, why, Caren?
Yeah. Why now?
I'm slammed.
Um,
I got all this other stuff. I mean, you just nailed the objection. So how do you handle that? Because you mentioned up front that one of the things you hope for with this podcast is that maybe some other people will get some nuggets out of it. And I think this could potentially be a really good one, to hear is because that's not unique to 100. So
oh,
many of these new
no. Yeah.
companies and new tech that are entering the industry are hearing that exact objection.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what do you think the best approach is to answer or
Yeah,
overcome?
well, I mean, listen, I would think about what is it costing you to not address this properly, right? So, like, let's zoom in on fraud, right? It's the cost of the solutions you're currently using, which, by the way, aren't doing the job. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about fraud as much as what we're, as I mean, like as much as we're currently talking about it, and we wouldn't be seeing the fraud rates and the delinquency rates that we're seeing. So, it's the cost of those solutions. It's the cost of your team's time to vet those applicants and vet that information. It's the cost of your team's time to manage delinquency and manage debt. It's the cost of legal, of eviction, right? That balloons to tens of thousands of dollars per case, right? So it's like, it's the cost of getting it wrong. It's the cost of not doing anything about it. And by the way, it's only getting worse. So, like, to me, this goes back to why, like, why jump in, Caren, and start another company, right? This problem needs to be solved. It has to be. It's just too costly. It's too expensive. Um, and we felt like, man, like we feel like there's a better way, and we feel like there's a more holistic way. There's a more comprehensive way to solve it. So I guess the question I'd ask back is, well, how long can you go? How much more money can you spend or waste by not solving this problem?
There you have it.
Well, Caren, that's a good spot to end it. We're right up on time. If people want to learn more about 100 or get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, they can go to get100.com. That's get100.com. They could follow us on LinkedIn and just message us, or they could just email me directly. It's Caren with a C, Caren at get100.com. Thank you both so much.
Caren, if I were to type in find 100 or my 100, or I, well, I'll stop there. We were
We're already
joking
on
about
GoDaddy. We're just
yeah,
buying
so
whatever else.
yeah. How many domains does she have?
Too
Okay.
many. Like 22
right.
extra, probably. Probably same for you guys too.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Caren.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you.